She took cough syrup with her prescription medication. Her husband had the same cold and took cough syrup too. Same house, same pharmacy, same bottle sitting on the kitchen counter. One of them went back to work 3 days later. The other woke up unable to climb a flight of stairs. At first, Maggie thought she was dehydrated. Then she could not lift her arms above her shoulders. Then her legs started giving out beneath her. 48 hours after taking the cough syrup, her urine turned the color of Coca-Cola. The emergency room doctor ordered blood work. What came back made no sense. The proteins inside her muscle cells were flooding into her bloodstream. Her muscles were dissolving inside her body. And here is the part that terrified her doctors. The cough syrup was not toxic. Her prescription medication was not toxic. Both had been approved. Both had been prescribed millions of times. But together they created a reaction so dangerous that her kidneys were beginning to shut down. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the damage had already spread through her entire body. This is hidden pathogens.
This is hidden pathogens?
She lived in Columbus, Ohio with her husband Chris, married for 12 years. No major health problems, no history of hospitalizations, no reason to think she was about to become a medical case study. But Maggie did take one medication every day, a prescription her doctor had started 6 months earlier to control her cholesterol. One pill every morning, same dose, same pharmacy, never missed. Maggie was careful about things like that. She read medication labels. She followed instructions. If a bottle said take with food, she took it with food. If a doctor said avoid alcohol, she avoided alcohol. Chris was different, not reckless. Just relaxed. He was 40, worked in IT, forgot where he left his keys at least twice a week. If Maggie read every warning label, Chris threw the box away before he got home. That difference became obvious whenever one of them got sick. Maggie would check symptoms online. Chris would drink water and wait it out. Most of the time, neither approach mattered. Then, in early January, both of them caught the same cold. Runny nose, sore throat, dry cough, nothing unusual. No fever, no shortness of breath, just the kind of winter illness that passes through an office and disappears a week later. Neither of them thought much about it. On Friday evening, they stopped at a pharmacy on the way home. They bought a bottle of cough syrup. The same bottle, the same brand, the same active ingredients. Chris took a dose before bed. Maggie took a dose before bed. One of them would wake up feeling slightly better. The other would wake up with a medical emergency already beginning inside her body. Remember that. Remember who took what, because only one of them is about to walk into the emergency room. The cold started on a Tuesday, not dramatically, no high fever, no severe pain, just a scratchy throat that Maggie noticed during a morning meeting. By lunchtime, Chris had it too. The next day brought congestion, a runny nose, a cough that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the chest. The kind of cough that keeps you awake just long enough to make the next day miserable. Neither of them were concerned. Adults catch colds all the time. Most never see a doctor. Most get better on their own. By Friday evening, the worst symptom was the cough. It wasn't dangerous, just annoying. Every few minutes, another fit, another interruption, another night of broken sleep. On the drive home from work, they stopped at a pharmacy. Maggie headed for the cold medicine aisle. Rows of bottles stretched across the shelves. Nighttime formulas, daytime formulas, cough suppressants, expectorants, combination products promising relief from every symptom imaginable. She picked one of the most common brands in America, no prescription required. Available in almost every pharmacy in the country. Millions of people had taken it safely. Chris grabbed a bottle too. At checkout, neither of them gave it another thought. Why would they? It was cough syrup. Not chemotherapy, not an experimental drug, not something that required warnings from specialists. Just cough syrup, the kind of medicine people leave forgotten in bathroom cabinets for years. That night, Maggie swallowed her usual prescription medication with dinner. A few hours later, she measured out a dose of cough syrup. Chris did the same. They brushed their teeth, turned off the lights, and went to bed. She took the first dose before bed. Nothing happened. At least nothing she could feel. Here is what happened inside Maggie's body while she slept. The cholesterol medication was already there. She had taken it every day for 6 months. Every morning, her liver broke it down the same way. Every day, the concentration stayed within a safe range. Her body knew exactly what to do with it. Then the cough syrup arrived. Not enough to hurt a healthy person. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough for Maggie to notice anything unusual. But hidden inside the syrup was an ingredient that affected the same liver enzyme responsible for processing her prescription medication. Think of the enzyme like a highway. Every day, Maggie's medication traveled down that highway and exited safely. Then the cough syrup closed several lanes. Traffic slowed, the medication could still move, just not fast enough. Hour by hour, more of it remained trapped in her bloodstream. The next dose from the previous morning was still there, and the dose before that. The concentration began climbing higher than her doctor had ever intended. Higher than the level tested during clinical trials. Higher than the level considered safe. Maggie slept through all of it. Her heart kept beating. Her breathing stayed normal. Nothing hurt. Nothing warned her. Inside her muscle cells, however, something had already started to change. The medication was reaching toxic levels. Tiny structures inside the muscle fibers began to fail. The cells could no longer regulate calcium. Without calcium control, the muscles could not maintain themselves. The damage spread from one cell to another, then thousands more. As each cell died, it ruptured. Proteins spilled into the bloodstream. Electrolytes leaked out. The contents of her muscles began circulating through her body. Her kidneys would eventually be forced to filter all of it, but they were not suffering yet. The muscles were. And the first symptom appeared the next morning. It was so small that Maggie almost ignored it. Her legs felt sore, not injured, not painful, just sore. The way they might feel after a long hike or an unusually hard workout. The problem was that she had not done either. She mentioned it to Chris over breakfast. "Maybe I'm getting old," she joked. Chris laughed. "You spent all day sitting at a computer." Maggie laughed too. Then she went to work. By lunchtime, the soreness had spread. Her thighs felt heavy. Walking up a single flight of stairs left her unusually tired. She blamed the cold. The cough was still there. The congestion was still there. Being tired made sense. Having sore muscles made sense. Everything still fit the story of a normal viral illness. That evening, she took another dose of cough syrup. And another the next morning. By Saturday afternoon, something felt wrong. Not terrifying, just wrong. She was carrying groceries from the car when her arms started burning. Halfway to the front door, she had to stop and rest. The bags weren't heavy, yet her muscles behaved as if she had been lifting weights for hours. Chris noticed. "You okay?" "Probably just the cold." That answer satisfied both of them. For another day, Sunday morning, Maggie woke up exhausted, not sleepy, weak. The difference matters. Sleep fixes tiredness. Sleep did nothing for this. She climbed out of bed and felt her legs tremble beneath her. The cold itself was actually improving. Less congestion, less coughing, but somehow she felt worse. That afternoon, she visited an urgent care clinic. The waiting room was full of people with the same seasonal illness. Coughs, sneezes, runny noses. Maggie fit right in. The physician assistant checked her vitals. Normal. Blood pressure normal. Heart rate normal. Oxygen normal. No fever. No obvious signs of serious illness. Any chest pain? No. Any shortness of breath? No. Any recent injuries? No. A brief exam followed. Push against my hands. Follow my finger. Take a deep breath. Everything looked reassuring. The diagnosis took less than a minute. Viral syndrome, dehydration, rest, fluids, over-the-counter pain medication. She was told to go home and give it time. Nobody ordered blood work. Nobody reviewed her medications. Nobody asked what she had taken for the cough. And because nobody asked, nobody realized that her muscles were continuing to break apart with every passing hour. Maggie left urgent care relieved. The doctor wasn't worried, so why should she be? By the time she pulled into her driveway, thousands more muscle cells had already died. She just couldn't feel it yet. 48 hours after the first dose, Maggie woke up before sunrise. Something felt wrong immediately. Not the cold, not the cough, something deeper. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and tried to stand. Nothing happened. Her muscles responded a fraction of a second too late. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the nightstand before hitting the floor. For a moment, she just sat there, confused. People do not forget how to stand. People do not wake up unable to trust their own legs. She tried again. This time she made it 3 steps before her thighs began shaking violently. The effort of walking to the bathroom felt like climbing a mountain. Chris was still asleep when she reached the toilet. That was when she saw it. The urine in the bowl was almost black. Not red, not brown, black, like cola. She stared at it, then flushed, then stared again after the next trip, same color. Something was terribly wrong. She called for Chris. The panic in her voice got him out of bed instantly. Within minutes, they were heading toward the emergency room, but they never made it there. Halfway across the hospital parking lot, Maggie stopped walking. The pain hit without warning. A deep burning sensation exploded through both thighs, then her shoulders, then her back. It felt as though every muscle in her body had been bruised at the same time. She grabbed the side of the car. Chris rushed around to help her. "Maggie?" She tried to answer. Instead, her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the pavement. Not unconscious, not having a seizure. Something almost worse. She was fully awake, fully aware, and suddenly unable to lift herself off the ground. People gathered. A nurse arriving for her shift ran over. Someone called for a wheelchair. Maggie tried to stand again. Nothing. The muscles that had carried her through 38 years of life simply refused to work. Inside her bloodstream, the contents of millions of destroyed muscle cells were pouring toward her kidneys. The protein called myoglobin was rising to dangerous levels. Potassium was spilling into her blood. The damage was accelerating. And for the first time, doctors were about to see what had been happening inside her body for the past 2 days. The emergency room team rolled her through the doors. They thought they were treating a woman with weakness after a cold. The blood tests would reveal something far worse. The emergency room physician saw Maggie for less than 3 minutes before forming a theory. It was a reasonable theory, which made it dangerous. A woman arrives during cold season, recent cough, recent congestion, profound fatigue, muscle aches, weakness. Doctors see that combination every day. The first diagnosis was a severe viral infection, possibly influenza, possibly COVID, possibly one of dozens of other viruses known to cause temporary muscle inflammation. They started IV fluids, drew blood, ordered a chest X-ray, and waited. Maggie lay in the hospital bed while the weakness continued to spread. An hour later, she struggled to lift her phone. 2 hours later, even adjusting her position in bed required effort. The virus explanation was beginning to crack. The second theory arrived shortly afterward. Dehydration. The dark urine seemed to fit. The recent illness seemed to fit. Maybe she had simply become severely dehydrated. More fluids were ordered. More waiting. No improvement. Then a third possibility appeared, an autoimmune disease. Sometimes the immune system attacks muscle tissue directly. Sometimes it happens suddenly. Sometimes healthy adults wake up weak, for reasons nobody can immediately explain. A rheumatology consult was discussed. Additional tests were considered. The list of possibilities kept growing, but none of them explained everything. Not the speed, not the severity. Not the fact that Maggie had gone from a mild cold to barely being able to stand in less than 2 days. Meanwhile, the laboratory was processing her blood samples. The doctors had not seen the results yet. If they had, the conversation would have changed instantly, because one value was so abnormal that it almost looked like a mistake. The technician checked it twice, then a third time. The number was real, and it was unlike anything Maggie's doctors expected to see. Upstairs, in her hospital room, physicians debated viruses, dehydration, autoimmune disorders, rare neurological diseases. Nobody was asking the right question. Nobody was looking at the bottle of cough syrup, and nobody had reviewed the prescription medication she took every morning. Not yet, but one doctor was about to notice a laboratory result so extreme that every diagnosis on the board would suddenly stop making sense. 3 hours after Maggie arrived in the emergency room, a hospitalist reviewed her chart. He had seen hundreds of cases of influenza, hundreds of cases of dehydration, hundreds of patients who felt worse than they looked. But one laboratory result stopped him cold: creatine kinase. CK meaning creatine kinase, a protein released when muscle cells are damaged. Healthy people usually measure under 200. Athletes after extreme exercise might reach a few thousand. A serious injury could push it higher. Maggie's CK was over 120,000. He stared at the number, then refreshed the screen. Same result. He called the laboratory. Can you verify this? The technician already had. Twice. The number was real. The hospitalist leaned back in his chair. No cold causes a CK of 120,000. No dehydration causes a CK of 120,000. No routine viral illness causes muscles to disintegrate on that scale. Something was destroying her muscle tissue, and it was doing it fast. He opened the rest of the laboratory report. The findings were even worse. Myoglobin levels were elevated. Kidney function was beginning to deteriorate. Liver enzymes were climbing. Not because her liver was failing, because dying muscle cells release enzymes that can mimic liver damage. The pattern pointed toward a diagnosis he had seen only a handful of times. The diagnosis includes massive muscle breakdown, the kind that can destroy the kidneys, the kind that can kill. But it's not just a diagnosis. It is an outcome. Something had caused it. The question was what? The hospitalist walked into Maggie's room. She looked exhausted. Chris sat beside the bed. Both were waiting for answers. Instead, the doctor started asking questions. Had she exercised recently? No. Any injuries? No. Falls? No. Heat exposure? No. Illegal drugs? No. The usual causes disappeared one by one. Then he asked a question nobody else had asked. A question that should have been asked at urgent care. A question that should have been asked the moment she entered the emergency room. What medications are you taking? Maggie listed her cholesterol medication. The doctor nodded. Then she mentioned the cough syrup. His expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Chris to notice. What kind of cough syrup? Maggie told him. The doctor looked down at the chart, then back at Maggie, then back at the chart again. Because for the first time since this started, the pieces were beginning to fit together. A common prescription, a common cough medicine, taken together, and a CK level high enough to liquefy muscle tissue from the inside. The cold had never been the problem. The cough had never been the problem. The danger had been sitting in Maggie's medicine cabinet the entire time, and now the doctors needed to find out whether they had caught it before her kidneys failed completely. Before we continue, if you're fascinated by real medical mysteries like this, share this video and subscribe to this channel. And if you value these videos, there's a free link in the description and pinned comment that helps support the channel. Every bit of click helps us continue researching and telling these stories, and it's completely free. Let's continue. The hospitalist pulled a chair beside Maggie's bed. I think we know what's happening, he said. Maggie had never heard the word before. Neither had Chris. Rhabdomyolysis. The room went quiet. Chris finally asked the question, what is that? Here is what the doctors believed had happened, and here is why it matters. Most people think of medications as individual things. One bottle, one drug, one effect. But your body does not see them that way. Your body sees chemistry. Every medication you swallow enters a system of enzymes whose job is to process and remove it. Most of the time, those systems work perfectly. Millions of people take prescription medications every day without problems. Millions more take cough medicine every winter. The danger appears when two drugs unexpectedly interfere with each other. That is called a drug interaction. One medication changes the way the body handles another. Sometimes the effect is small, sometimes it is dangerous, and sometimes it is catastrophic. In Maggie's case, her cholesterol medication depended on a liver enzyme to break it down and remove it from her bloodstream. The cough syrup interfered with that process. Not enough to hurt most people, but enough to slow the medication's clearance. Hour after hour, the medication accumulated. Dose after dose, its concentration rose higher than her body could tolerate, and her muscles paid the price. Maggie looked down at her legs. They just stopped working. The doctor nodded. They were already being injured before you felt weak. This condition has a name, rhabdomyolysis. It literally means the breakdown of skeletal muscle. When muscle cells are damaged, they rupture. Imagine millions of microscopic water balloons bursting at the same time. Everything inside spills out. Proteins, electrolytes, enzymes, cellular debris. All of it floods into the bloodstream. One of those proteins is called myoglobin. Inside healthy muscle, myoglobin stores oxygen. Outside the muscle, it becomes dangerous. Maggie looked toward the bathroom. My urine. The black color? The doctor asked. She nodded. That wasn't blood. It was myoglobin. The room fell silent. Large amounts of myoglobin travel through the bloodstream until they reach the kidneys. The kidneys try to filter it. That is their job. But when too much arrives at once, myoglobin begins damaging the kidneys themselves. It can clog tiny filtering structures, reduce blood flow, trigger inflammation, and slowly poison the very organs trying to remove it. A nurse walked in carrying another bag of IV fluids. She replaced the empty bag without saying a word. Chris watched her hang the new one. How many of those has she had? 5, the nurse answered quietly, and she'll probably need more. Every bag had the same purpose: keep Maggie producing urine, because every drop of urine carried myoglobin out of her body. The less urine she made, the more myoglobin stayed behind. Maggie suddenly frowned. I don't think I've needed the bathroom in hours. The doctor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her latest laboratory results. Then he looked back at Maggie. If enough myoglobin accumulates, the kidneys begin to fail. Waste products build up. Potassium rises. The heart's electrical system becomes unstable. Patients can end up on dialysis. Some never recover. Some die. And here is the most frightening part. The drug interaction had already ended. Stopping the medications could not undo what had already happened. While Maggie thought she had a stubborn cold, her muscles were already breaking apart. While urgent care reassured her, the damage continued. While she slept, thousands upon thousands of muscle cells were dying. Her muscles weren't dissolving because of the cold. They were dissolving because 2 medications had collided inside her body. The doctors finally knew why it had happened, but they still didn't know whether her kidneys would survive. Once the doctors identified the cause, Maggie and Chris expected the nightmare to be over. Stop the medications, treat the reaction, go home. That is how most people imagine medicine works. Find the problem, fix the problem, move on. But the nephrologist shook his head. The interaction is over, he said. The medications aren't hurting her anymore. Maggie looked relieved. For about 2 seconds, then he finished the sentence. But what they already did, that's still happening. The room fell silent. Here is what made this reaction so dangerous. The cough syrup was no longer causing damage. Neither was the prescription medication. Those drugs had already done their job. The muscles they injured had begun breaking apart, and every minute those damaged muscles released more myoglobin into Maggie's bloodstream. The doctors couldn't stop that. They could only help her body survive it. The nephrologist opened another page of her chart. Her creatinine had increased again. Her kidneys were filtering less blood than they had just hours earlier. Then he looked at another number. Urine output. Lower again. Maggie frowned. The kidneys were beginning to slow down. The doctors reacted immediately. Another bag of IV fluids. Then another. Then another. Every liter had one purpose: keep the kidneys making urine. Because every drop carried myoglobin out of Maggie's body. If the kidneys stopped producing urine, the myoglobin would remain inside, and the damage would accelerate. For most patients, aggressive fluids are enough. The kidneys recover, the myoglobin clears, the crisis ends, but not everyone responds. Maggie wasn't responding. Hour after hour, the laboratory numbers continued drifting in the wrong direction. The nephrologist didn't know where the point of no return was. No doctor does. There is no blood test that says her kidneys can still be saved. Doctors watch the numbers. They watch the urine. And they wait. Just after midnight, the laboratory called again. Another critical result. Maggie's potassium had climbed even higher. The ICU physician looked at the monitor beside her bed. Potassium controls the electrical signals that tell the heart when to beat. Too much doesn't simply weaken the heart. It can stop it without warning. One heartbeat, then another, then chaos. A patient can be talking one moment and collapse the next. Within minutes, Maggie's room filled with people, critical care, nephrology, nurses, everyone watching the same monitor, waiting for a rhythm they hoped would stay normal. Chris stood quietly in the corner. His eyes drifted to a machine parked outside the room. He hadn't noticed it before. Plastic tubing, a monitor, a reclining chair. It looked ordinary, until the nephrologist followed his gaze. "That's the dialysis machine," he said. "We brought it up in case we need it." Chris felt his stomach drop. 24 hours earlier, they had been standing in a pharmacy comparing cough syrups. Now a machine was waiting to do his wife's kidneys job. The nephrologist pulled a chair beside Maggie's bed. "If your kidneys start recovering," he said, "we won't need it." He paused. "But if they stop?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. At 2:14 that morning, another set of blood tests was sent to the laboratory. The dialysis machine remained outside the room, unplugged, waiting, just like everyone else, because the doctors finally knew what had caused Maggie's illness. But they still didn't know whether her kidneys were going to survive. At 4:37 the next morning, the nurse walked into Maggie's room carrying a small plastic container. She smiled. It was the first smile anyone had seen all night. Maggie looked confused. The nurse held it up. Urine. Not much. Barely enough to cover the bottom. But it was there. The kidneys were still working. The dialysis machine remained outside the room, unplugged, waiting. The nephrologist looked at the new laboratory results. Maggie's creatinine had stopped rising, not falling, just stopped. For the first time since she arrived, the numbers were no longer getting worse. The crisis had finally slowed down, not because the doctors had repaired her kidneys. They couldn't, because her kidneys had managed to survive long enough to repair themselves. The dialysis machine was rolled away that afternoon. Chris watched it disappear down the hallway. Only then did he realize he had been staring at it for almost 24 hours. After a week in the hospital, Maggie went home. Everyone called her lucky. She didn't feel lucky. She could barely climb the 3 steps leading to her front door. The doctors had saved her kidneys. Now she had to rebuild everything else. Because surviving rhabdomyolysis and recovering from rhabdomyolysis are 2 very different things. The muscle fibers destroyed during the reaction could not simply switch back on. They had to heal, slowly, painfully. The first challenge wasn't walking across a room. It was walking across a parking lot. Chris parked as close to the grocery store entrance as he could. It still felt too far. Halfway there, Maggie stopped. Her legs shook. "I need a minute." Chris reached for her arm. She pulled away. "I can do it." She just needed another minute. Physical therapy began the following week. The therapist didn't ask Maggie to run, or even jog. She pointed toward a single step. "Let's start there." 1 step, then another. Some days Maggie managed an entire flight of stairs. Other days she struggled with 2. The hardest part wasn't the pain. It was not knowing whether this was temporary or permanent. Every appointment ended with the same question. "When will I be back to normal?" The answer never changed. "We don't know." That uncertainty followed her home. 3 months earlier, Maggie had been healthy. Now carrying a basket of laundry upstairs felt like finishing a marathon. Every Tuesday after work, Chris drove her to physical therapy. At first, he walked beside her. By the second month, he walked a few steps behind. Not because she needed less help, because she hated feeling as though someone was watching her struggle. So he stayed close enough to catch her if she fell, far enough away to let her believe she was doing it alone. One evening they sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where they had measured cough syrup into identical plastic cups. The bottles were gone. Neither of them had wanted to keep them. Maggie stared at the empty space in the medicine cabinet. "It was just a cold." Chris looked at her. His cold had lasted 4 days. He barely remembered it. Maggie had spent 4 months wondering whether she would ever trust her own body again. By month 5, she could climb stairs without stopping. By month 6, she no longer needed physical therapy. Most people looking at Maggie would never know she had almost lost her kidneys. They would never know why she paused before taking any new medication, or why she read every label 3 times. Chris noticed something else. Every time Maggie reached for a bottle of medicine, she hesitated. Not for seconds, for minutes. The muscles had healed, the kidneys had recovered, but the fear hadn't. And some scars don't appear on an MRI or in a blood test. They follow you home, long after the hospital has forgotten your name. By every medical measurement, Maggie was a success. She survived. Her kidneys recovered. She walked again. She went back to work. On paper, the case was over. A year later, she returned to the hospital for one final follow-up. The nephrologist compared her latest blood tests with the ones from the week she almost needed dialysis. The difference was remarkable. Her kidneys had recovered far better than anyone expected. Maggie smiled. For the first time since the reaction, she thought she might finally be finished with it. Then the nephrologist closed the chart. "I have good news," he said. "And I have honest news." Maggie's smile faded. "You recovered." He paused. "But your kidneys are not the same kidneys you had before." The room became quiet. He explained that millions of microscopic filtering units inside the kidneys had survived. Some hadn't. Those lost during the reaction would never grow back. She would probably never notice the difference. Until something happened. A severe infection. Another dehydration episode. Another medication that stressed the kidneys. She had recovered, but she had less reserve than she once did. Less room for another mistake. Maggie nodded. She understood. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in the back of her mind for a year. Could this happen again? The doctor didn't answer immediately. It could, but now we know you're at risk. That sentence followed her home. Not because she expected another reaction, because she realized she could never take medications the way she once had. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal. Or at least it looked normal. Then one winter, Chris caught another cold. He stood in the pharmacy staring at the cough medicine shelf. For a moment, he couldn't remember which bottle they had bought the year before. Then he did. He put it back. When he came home, Maggie was standing in front of the medicine cabinet. She had a bottle of allergy medicine in one hand, her phone in the other. She wasn't looking up symptoms. She was checking for interactions. Again, Chris smiled gently. "It's probably okay." Maggie nodded. She knew. Then she kept reading. A minute passed, then another. Finally, she handed him the bottle. "Can you check too?" Chris read the label. Then he opened the interaction checker on his phone anyway. That had become their routine. Not because either of them was obsessive, because both of them remembered. The morning Maggie couldn't stand, the black urine, the dialysis machine waiting outside her hospital room, the pharmacist who later explained that everything had been perfectly legal. Perfectly ordinary, perfectly capable of changing a life. Today, Maggie carries a medical information card in her wallet. Across the top, in bold letters, it reads, "Severe drug-induced rhabdomyolysis." Underneath is a list of medications every future doctor needs to know she can no longer take together. It weighs only a few grams, but Maggie never leaves home without it, because the most permanent scar she carries isn't on her kidneys, it isn't in her muscles, it's in the way she thinks. Before that cold, she assumed that if a medication was sold legally, it was automatically safe. Now she knows something different. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't a dangerous drug. It's two ordinary ones meeting inside the same body. Maggie survived, but every time she reaches for a bottle of medicine, she remembers the week one ordinary cold changed the rest of her life. She took cough syrup with her prescription medication. Her husband had the same cold and took cough syrup too. Same house, same pharmacy, same bottle sitting on the kitchen counter. One of them went back to work the following week. The other woke up unable to stand. 48 hours later, her urine had turned black. Blood tests showed her muscles were breaking apart inside her body. By the time the doctors discovered why, her kidneys were already beginning to fail. The cough syrup wasn't poisonous. The prescription medication wasn't poisonous. Together, they almost were. Maggie survived. Chris did too, but neither of them ever forgot that bottle on the kitchen counter. Years later, when either of them gets sick, Chris still picks up cough medicine at the pharmacy. He still brings it home. Then he sets it on the counter and waits. Maggie doesn't open it, not right away. She turns the bottle over, reads every warning, checks every interaction, then reads it all again. Chris checks too. Not because they don't trust medicine, because they know how ordinary danger can look. One cold, one prescription, one bottle of cough syrup, one decision that seemed completely routine. Two people caught the same cold. Two people took cough syrup. One recovered in 4 days. The other spent months learning to walk again. That was the only difference. That was the entire difference. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. These stories take a lot of research to put together. If you'd like to support the channel, you'll find a free link in the description and pinned comment. Checking it out helps support future videos, and every click allows us to keep bringing these cases to the channel. Also, it's completely free. And if you learned something from this case, like, share, and subscribe for more real medical stories. And if you chose not to subscribe, leave a comment and tell me what would make these videos better. I read far more comments than you might think. This is Hidden Pathogens. I'll see you in the next video. Good night.
This is Hidden Pathogens?